Jason and Amanda, Darren and Marty, it's fantastic to have you here. And of course, good morning to the Alberta Angel Investment community that's on the line today. My name is Jeanette Jackson. I'm the CEO of Foresight. We are Western Canada's clean tech accelerator. So we work with early stage ventures and innovators to ultimately find their path forward to scale. And we also run a variety of programs for academia, government, investors, and industry to engage with all of the innovators in the community. So today we're having a great, robust discussion on investing in early stage ventures. So I'm really not going to do all the talking. I'm going to definitely pass it on to Darren and Marty to give their amazing expertise and insights into some of these issues. I will just highlight that I am a serial entrepreneur. So I've been on the side of raising money, and it's a process, and it's really about building relationships and trust. And then on the other side, I have done some angel investing as well. So how do I, look at ventures and what are the characteristics? That being said, Marty and Darren have definitely been in this game a lot longer and more in depth than I have. So without further ado, maybe we'll start with Marty. Maybe you can dive in and tell us a bit about your background and how you came to be involved in investing in clean tech.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. So Marty Reed, run a fund called Evok Innovations, but really spent the bulk of my career in Silicon Valley. First as an entrepreneur, sort of most relevant to this, 3 venture-backed companies, and then joined a venture firm as a partner. This was back in kind of the 2008, 2009 timeframe. It made the decision with my other partners to focus 100% of our efforts on clean tech and issues around climate change. And so my very first deal that I led as a sort of newly minted partner in a fund just happened to be a company based up here in Vancouver called Inventus, now known as Savante, which is doing carbon capture. Which then got me connected into the Canadian clean tech scene. And so made another deal after that up here in a company called Axine. And next thing you know, I moved up to Vancouver in 2015 to launch Evok, and have made, another 15 or 20 or so investments in the clean tech community, mostly in Western Canada, but also in California and the US. So that's my quick sort of 1-minute bio.
Awesome. Thanks, Marty. Darren, over to you.
Hello, my name is Darren Boulding. I'm with Natural Products Canada. I'm fairly new to the investment world. I've been with Natural Products Canada for 3 years, making equity investments. We have 13. I've been involved in 4 in Alberta and BC. My background is I did my MBA at the University of Alberta in 2000, and last 20 years I've been involved in commercialization one way or another. Started out in tech transfer and ended up moving to Australia and New Zealand. And it was in New Zealand that I got involved in clean tech. I was involved in renewable, basically cellulosic ethanol, as well as bioplastics and biocomposites for automobile parts and that. And that got me really interested in the clean tech space and wanted to come home. And last 3 years have been with MPC, and probably one of our most recent deals in this space is a company called Bass Fiber from Victoria that essentially uses hemp fiber to replace synthetic fibers in wipes and other types of products. So yeah, so it's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Darren. I'm going to start you back on Darren. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your investment thesis at NPC. Do you want to give us a little bit of a snapshot there?
Sure. So with Natural Products Canada, the key thing is what we invest in has to have a biological innovation. So we don't invest in things that are involve artificial intelligence or drones, for example, but we do invest in things like biomaterials, which, for example, using hemp to replace plastics, biosensors, ingredients that come from waste products. So all those types of biological things is what we invest in. We put in up to $500,000 in rounds between 1 to 2.5 million. So we're in on the seed stage. We've done one deal on Series A, but we are seed investors, and often we do co-invest with angels. A number of our deals have been co-investments with angels. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much a summary of what we do.
Awesome. Marty, how about Evok?
Well, I want to push back on Darren and say he won't invest in AI. Jason likes to ask people, what part of their job won't be replaced by AI, and I think AI is in everything, so including natural products, but I'll set that aside for a moment. On the Evok side, our thesis is pretty straightforward. We have two primary partners in Suncor and Cenovus that I presume everyone is familiar with. And so our mission is really to help them improve their environmental performance. We do that by investing in early stage innovation with a pretty broad lens. If you think about the scope of all the things that, say, a Suncor might touch, all the way from sort of retail distribution all the way up through production. And so we've invested in kind of a mix of hard tech through to digital solutions, hard tech being things like carbon capture or converting CO2 into valuable products. On the software or digital side, things like, yes, how do you apply AI to improve performance of industrial solutions? Typically come in with a first check, sort of that post kind of early angel round, which means our first check is usually somewhere between 1 and 2 million, but we've got a bit of flexibility. I think our smallest check ever was 250K, and our largest was 10 million, which is a pretty big range. But we also like to syndicate. And one of the values, and we may touch on this later, but we really like to maintain a pretty broad network of syndicate partners that we know and trust throughout the globe, and are talking with investors literally throughout the world that we might be able to bring in later stage to help support these companies, because usually it takes a whole team effort to get it over the goal line. So sorry, I mentioned geography, but a lot of what we do is in in Canada, but we are agnostic. And so if you've got a great solution that we think can help solve challenges of industry, we don't really care where you are. So
yeah, awesome. Thanks, Marty. Let's move on in terms of selecting viable ventures. What do you look for when you're evaluating and doing your due diligence, and perhaps even some commentary on how you look at sort of the more incremental opportunities versus the transformational opportunities. Marty, back to you.
Yeah, and what I will say is this evolves. And what I would say is where we are today, we're not looking at anything incremental. Is sort of the easy answer. But to expand beyond that, I guess, what are we looking for these days, given what has been a sort of tectonic shift in ESG and GHG? I'm going to try to only use 3-letter acronyms if I could for a while, but with what really has been a transformational shift, we are focused on kind of carbon capture, sequestration, and or hydrogen at scale to include storage and transportation. And so sort of within there, it's tough to imagine kind of little incremental improvements. And we generally measure impact by kind of, could we get to gigaton is a bit of a high bar, but maybe half a gigaton. And when I say gigaton, meaning of reduced GHG emissions. And in the same way, if you were applying for a grant from SDTC or Emissions Reduction Alberta, you have to put in some calculations. That's the sort of scale that we're looking for. On the incremental side, though, to be honest, and we have made some investments in recently in this space. I guess most recently, and this is public, a company called Eric's. Fantastic founder. We met through Creative Destruction Lab. She's based down in the Gulf States, but has developed an autonomous robot that does inspections, inline inspections, and pipe inspections. It's really clever. It's cool. And how we then would determine that would be a pretty simple question, which is, could we see this company getting to revenue within kind of 12 to 18 months? And if yes, do we then see a pathway where this could get sort of gobbled up by a big provider? And in this case, okay, who does this at scale? It's a Schlumberger, Baker Hughes, Halliburton sort of approach. We come in, we help them get to revenue. 2-3 years later, off they go. And we've got a similar example of this in a company of ours called Dark Vision, local BC company here. went through exactly this path, came in, got them to revenue. Their revenue sort of started that classic hockey stick. And just about a year ago, they got acquired, undisclosed, but let's just say it was a very nice outcome for the founders and for us early investors. So anyways, those are kind of the two buckets. Either have a massive impact or be able to get the revenue almost immediately.
Right. Darren, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think most of our investments are transformational. So I guess it depends how you define transformational versus incremental. But, you know, I like to see, I get a lot of entrepreneurs that just really fanatic about saving the environment. And, you know, that's really key. It's important in clean tech. But I often look, well, is the customer going to buy this? What is the value proposition for the customer? And, you know, Jeanette, one of the companies I work with that, you know, is Wine Crush. And when I originally started working with them, it was all about taking the waste from wineries and making a food ingredient and say, well, why the hell would anybody buy this ingredient? Like, what will drive the customer? And, you know, I stopped and had a burger, plant-based burger, and I saw all the salt. And I just called him up, just focus on plant-based meat. And he's got tremendous amount of interest. And one thing that's really key for me is to see, we'll invest pre-revenue, but seeing those partnerships and those companies interested in testing the product or trialing it really gives me a better sense that there's a market out there and more confidence that there's a market when they start selling. So I really like to see those partnerships, etc. Also, some really strong IP that has some breadth is really important. There's going to be competition in the future. Regardless of what's in the market right now, you'll be facing competition, and having some solid IP and solid technology that solves one big problem is very important for us. But, you know, yeah.
Awesome. I noticed that neither of you mentioned the team. Maybe we can dive in a little bit there.
Yeah, I'll add on that. The team is very important. You mean, it's with startup companies, often you don't have a senior person, but you have to have somebody that's willing to listen and recognizes the gaps and is willing to fill those gaps and listen to you. So that's key. Bast Fiber that we invested in was unusual, that it had a very senior team, like it had a dream team, right? It's just like, holy mackerel. But yeah. I mean, seldom you get that, but it's important to have somebody that's going to listen and recognizes the gaps.
Marty, what about you? Yeah.
I'll offer a very contrarian view. And if anyone sat in on a lecture I gave at UFC a month or so ago, this may surprise you, but 90% of venture investors will say some version of what they look for is a great team, a well-defined market, product market fit, strong IP. And I'll argue that's effectively completely wrong. And this is an important sort of question you want to ask yourself, which is, why are you an investor, and what sort of outcome or returns are you looking for? And so, there's kind of two buckets. There's the good, smart business in which you can put in some capital and make a decent return. And those are generally going to be fairly modest in size. If you want to play in venture, none of that matters, because the only way to make it work in venture is you need to get big home runs. Just, you can run the math a million ways a Sunday. You show me any other way, I'll believe it, but I've not seen it. And so to get those big home runs, you just need to fundamentally think different. And so this is where this question about, is the market, is it transformative or not? Well, if your total addressable market doesn't start with $1 trillion, it's not transformative, as one example. And so I can give example after example of where if you really wanted to provide a big return, you got to throw out a lot of those things. And so on the team piece, more than anything else, I'm looking for a couple of founders who are very open to collaboration and thinking really big and can sell a vision. And by sell a vision, I mean, actually, arguably the worst are folks that come out of industry and they're like, we've been working on this, left-handed swizzle nut for 40 years and we can improve it by 1.7 degrees. Like, I'd rather have the 28-year-old who says, I don't know anything about this, but I think I can transform it. I'll make my bet on that person. notice the important part there was a founder who is willing to learn, listen, and collaborate. When you start getting to my lessons learned, CEOs who think they're the CEO for life, like that's the biggest red flag that I sort of face in any deals I look at. And I ask myself every time, like, where do I think this founder is going to end up in 2-3 years? And are they excited about that path? Because if they're more excited about being a CEO than they are about building a transformative technology, that's
awesome.
So.
Yeah. Let's switch it over to the sort of angel investor side. For me as a founder who had raised money from under 50 angel investors and then went to, work with the venture community to raise our first seed round. Sometimes when you're your first time going through this process, you don't realize how important it is to have a good angel community that supported you so that the process moving forward is manageable. Perhaps you can shine some light on what your view is on what makes a good angel investor. Darren?
I mean, I think the ideal angel investor is somebody that can bring lots of value besides money. So it's all the connections, it's all the advice, the support that they provide. So it's not just about money for them. That is the ideal one. If they have a background in that industry and know players in the industry and they built their own company, they can be very helpful. That's ideal. Often you don't get those types of angels, but at very least you don't want to have an angel that wants to control everything, that has made money in a different industry and thinks that they could apply all their principles to this new, what you're doing, which may be totally different. I've been involved early on with one company I worked for, which we had a very wealthy angel that made a lot of money in mobile telephones and came into the biotech and just didn't understand the timelines. It takes a long time to go to market, right? And just could not understand that and wanted to control everything. And it just ended up being a disaster, right? So.
Yeah. Marty, what do you think?
Yeah, I think similar comments, which is I'll start with, I think it's most important that an angel be really clearly aligned with the vision of the founder. And there are a whole host of ways that can get sideways. And so Darren just mentioned like time frame. If you come from the software world and now you're in, pharma biotech and there's just a time mismatch, it's a fundamental problem. We have, and I'll probably offend everyone on this call, but that's okay. Within Evok, we've got a database and we literally have a category where we just list some deals as like Calgary specials, which are deals where an entrepreneur brought in a local angel who knows oil field services really well, and they're building what is effectively an oil field services business, but they need venture capital to build it. And it's just a complete mismatch. And so it's a failing of both the founder and the angels to be really clear about, okay, what type of business do we want this to be? And if it wasn't clear, like service companies are not venture companies. We don't think that way. We're not looking for cash flow. We're not looking for multiples on EBITDA. That's just not how venture works. We're looking for companies that can really rapidly scale with strong intellectual property and then ultimately get acquired. That's how venture works. And so go back to the beginning, the founders and the angels need to just be really clear. Here's the type of company. Here's what I need in my investors. And the more that communication can happen regularly, the better. And then the final one I'll say is, I hate the angel that thinks they need to sort of create something new in a deal. Oh,
yeah.
After having to deal with university tech transfer offices, which is my number one sort of most challenging thing in life, my second is trying to fix deals where angel investors thought that they should put all sorts of special terms in. I don't even do it anymore, actually. I just walk away. And so any deviation from standard docs.
What are the terms? I'm seeing some examples where earlier ventures are going out and they're just going with common shares. They're not doing anything preferred until much later in the process. What do you guys think about that?
I'll offer two comments. So one,
Yeah.
work with a lawyer who has done at least 50 venture rounds. If they haven't done 50 venture rounds, just go find a different lawyer. Full stop. It's sort of like if I'm going to go get eye surgery, I could go to my GP down the street, or I can go to a surgeon who only does, LASIK surgery. I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
So only work with a lawyer who knows what the heck they're doing, and then only use CVCA documents or NVCA, which is the Canadian Venture Capital Association. They've defined them. Like if your first draft is more than 3 red lines on that entire document, like there's a fundamental problem. So
Darren.
I think all our deals are mostly common equity. I think preferred is probably more common in the US than in Canada. So one of the last deal also had warrants, which we really liked because the company took off. I think we may have done one as a convertible note, but generally common equity. I think we stayed away from safes and that, but yeah.
Safes were on trend a couple of years ago. It was like the only thing that you could go to market with. Has that declined quite a bit over the last year?
I wouldn't say declined. This came out of the Valley, probably a decade ago. And you're right, we're all the rage. And in a startup market where the startup has all the power, safes sort of rise in popularity. And then when it's an investor market, they tend to decline in popularity. I think we've sort of reached a middle ground where we all understand how to use safes with some proper governance around them. So it's not my favorite instrument, but I'm not opposed to them. So.
Awesome. Let's get into sort of how due diligence should look when you're, early on. Often these ventures, they don't have a paying customer yet, but they hopefully are doing lots of customer discovery and building up their sales funnel and finding their right sort of niche beachhead market. What should the angels on here look for when they're trying to validate the technology and the potential performance of the business? Darren, Marty?
That's a good question. Due diligence is, I think the key thing is really understanding how big of a pain point this is in the industry and talking to people, and it's just a really significant problem. I've talked to a lot of big companies in the plant protein area that told me that salt is a major issue, right? It was part of my due diligence. And and also in terms of the technologies, it really innovative. Look what other technologies being developed, what's in the market, not just what's in the market, but what's being developed, how strong is their IP in terms of patents and that. Where are they at in their technology development? How further they have to do? What's required to get regulatory approval? Is their timelines right for regulatory approval? Do they have, what do they need? You have to understand what the risks are in the company. And then there's some risks that you may not be able to deal with. And so you need to walk away, but then there's other risks that you can mitigate. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. How, in terms of your experiences, what are 1 or 2 lessons you've learned that you would share in terms of a really big success or a enormous failure? Marty?
Yeah, and I may tie this in with actually the previous question, which is when I'm in due diligence early on, I think you've got to be really clear and put opportunities in 2 buckets, which is bucket 1 is, they may not have market, traction or verification just yet, but can we put in a small amount of money and figure it out? And that's oftentimes what an angel round is used for, which is, all right, I'll give you 250K, whatever it is, like go use that and come back with customers. The other bucket is, this is a big, hairy, transformational type of technology that might take 5 to 7 years. In which case, you don't have that luxury. And so in my mind, you have to eliminate any market risk, which is if it's going to take you 5 years to figure out if this works or not, if it works, it better be 100% absolutely clear that it will be a success. And so, it's sort of, I don't want to say a cure for cancer sort of thing where, it's pretty obvious if you've got a cure for cancer, there's a market for it. But it's kind of that binary. And so as one example I'll use, and I think it's relevant to this conversation or sort of this audience, especially in Alberta, you know, at Rhoda, which was my previous firm in the Valley, our first sort of big clean tech exit was a company called Solazyme, and it was developing biological chemicals, oils derived from algae. And we took the company public, about a $2 billion market cap. And our belief, of course, was, hey, if we could produce, drop-in fuels, replacements for hydrocarbons, at scale, that there would be a market there. And of course, what we've seen in the world is that's just not true. And so there is no green premium, at least not one that I've seen anywhere in the market yet. And so fast forward another 3 years, and that company was back at zero. And so from 0 to 2 billion to zero in the span all in of about 5 years. And the mistake on our end was that we assumed that there would be a market for a zero carbon drop-in fuel. And as much as the world says they want it, I'm yet to see that actually exists. So,
Darren?
Yeah, I mean, going back when I was in New Zealand, we invested in a biocomposite for using automobiles because there's lots of interest in replacing synthetic plastics in automobiles, and it was very early on. It never has gone anywhere because at that time it looked really good, but there's so many new competing technologies that come through, and you think it's great at the time, but new things come along, and it's a lot of it is timing too. I think getting timing right is important. I think 15 years ago, bioplastics, I don't think the timing was there, but now you're seeing a lot more of it. And I think the timing is probably right now for more bioplastic products to come through, right? But
What are your expectations on the governance of the venture? Is it too early? Do you encourage them to at least get some foundations on governance set up if they haven't already, or should the angel community be worried about that? Darren?
Oh, I think governance is important, right? You're talking about setting up a board and that, and that's part of that's critical to have that board representation and that, and we would demand having that in all of our deals. So it's important, and also even an advisory board, like sometimes you find CEOs that may not have a lot of experience, but they can bring in people from an advisory board and the board, they can provide that. So, but governance is critical, I think.
Yeah. Marty, do you guys always take a board seat or?
Well, so yes, and to double down on what Darren said, it is so important that you force yourself to get into the habit of minimally once a quarter sitting down and sort of documenting, okay, here's what we're going to do, here's our priorities, here's our plan. And if it's really early on, sort of at an angel stage, like I don't care if it's a formal board or an advisory board, I don't really care. What I do care about though is that you have that discipline to start that practice such that I can say, hey, show me, your board materials from 2 quarters ago. Great, you said you were going to do this. Did you do this? It's really important. But yes, with Evok, we take a board seat. I can sort of, there are probably 2 or 3 deals where we haven't, and those are either so early stage, it just didn't make sense to put in a more formal board, or it was, the opposite extreme where it was too late and we were like, we'll come in. But
this is a good team there. Yeah. Awesome. I've got a question about sort of, when the ventures come to you, let's maybe put our angel community hat on. What are mistakes that you often see? For one of the things that I notice is, and I actually had this myself. So I thought as a CEO that I needed to know everything. I was almost afraid to let the investors know what I didn't know because I wanted them to feel confident, right? But after working with the board and understanding that it's okay not to know everything, it just became much easier to have the conversations that you need to have. So Maybe you can lean in a little bit on what you think some of the mistakes that ventures and those early entrepreneurs make when they're going to the angels and pitching, and even yourselves, what you've experienced.
I can jump in, which is,
Sure.
I mean, Jeanette, I think you nailed the first one, which is, and something I said earlier, the founders need to be very open as to their strengths, weaknesses, be collaborative, be communicative. Part of that goes back to what I just said around board meetings. If they're not willing to sit down once a quarter and tell you what went well and what didn't go well, that's a really bad sign. A couple of other buckets, maybe. I've mentioned I have a disdain for universities, or more specifically tech transfer. And so any angel or startup that's coming out of university, get that buttoned up, because that can drag on and be just a nightmare forever. I'll shortly sort of, or just below universities in my concern, are strategics or corporates that come in early and support a company. And the amount of hours I've spent trying to sort of, I was about to say something inappropriate, but
navigate.
Sort of navigate deals that they had signed with big companies. And I'll throw my own partners under the bus. Like Suncor, has been known in the past to come in and give a company a small amount of money, but in exchange, they want, X, Y, and Z. And it inevitably, one of those things totally screws them up going forward. Yeah. And then you're, cleaning it up, negotiating it, trying to get them to sign away those rights. Oh, what a nightmare.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree with that. And I know I have a specific, one of the companies we invested in very early on, they brought in a strategic, and they had an option for exclusivity, and they had so much control. No other investors could come in. So it's impossible for them to raise money from anybody else. So really they're become the R&D arm for this big company because they don't really control their destiny. It wasn't until they actually sold that technology and pivoted out of it to something different that really opened up the doors. And we actually then invested in them. It was like 20 years after, but the first 12 years they were sucked in with this big company. But I agree with Marty that it's very important that the founder understands their gaps, but also what are they going to do about it? What's their plan to mitigate those risks? How are they going to go about it? And I mean, I always love it when they ask questions. Well, what do you think? So, ask for advice, right? So, I mean, that's key, and that's somebody that kind of oversells. I mean, I'm not really, yeah.
No, you want a good salesperson, but there's a time to sell and a time to collaborate and get the strategy sorted out, right?
True, absolutely.
Yeah. Along those lines, though, Jeanette, one of the things that can get screwed up very early on is sort of cap table and valuation. And so what you don't want is that entrepreneur that's so, quote, successful at selling, they end up with a valuation early on that's just not realistic. And there is some, and angels oftentimes will say, listen, we didn't price it, we just did a safe or whatever. And so, hey, no big deal, but expectations are set. And there's some pretty simple cap table math, or I call it venture math. Like just stick to that. And by that, I mean, after an initial round of investment, investors probably should own 20% of the company, and, the founders, the rest. And then when they do the next round, it's maybe they give up 25%, and you end up where kind of the founders have 50%. And the investors own 50%. There's kind of just a way it steps each path, each step along the journey. And when you screw that up, even if you, the investor, or you, the founder, got a good deal today, if you can't raise a round tomorrow, it doesn't help you. And so you've got to think about it's chess. You got to be thinking several moves ahead. And so again, cap table and valuation can get totally screwed up and just cause problems down the road.
Yeah, that's an issue, because then you can have a down round. The next round is then because your initial price was too high, right? So that's not good. So
last week when we had our session, this is the second session, of course, and the other group was mentioning that it's a bit competitive right now for some of the later stage investments. Like there's a lot of money flowing around. How have you been finding that on your side? And is there anything that the angel community should be looking at if, you know, with that environment?
I'll be clear. There's a lot of money flowing around, but it's going to a very small subset of people.
Yeah.
And so if you are a founder who is well known and has had a successful exit in the past, if you are in a given, you know, sort of attractive, hot space, great. Like the poster child for this right now is if you're a EV, sort of mid to late stage electric vehicle company, just file your SPAC paperwork now. And if you don't know SPACs, just Google them. But literally there's been, I think, 10 EV companies that have gone public via SPAC in the last 6 months at stupid valuations. I mean, literally full on stupid valuations. And so I would say this myth of there's a lot of money floating around, well, sorry, there's a truth to it, but where the reality hits the road, if you will, is that money is not going to sort of your average Joe or Jane. It's going to Elon Musk's brother or, you know, equivalent. If you're not a household name, you're probably not getting that kind of money.
Yeah, there is a lot of money, but it's I think the companies are finding difficulty accessing it. So I mean, he's right, it's not going to your average company. Everybody's looking for that transformational big fund that's going to be 100 million plus in revenue within, you know, number of years. So it's a tough environment, I think, for the companies to raise capital. And I mean, it's important to understand as a company what type of investor you should be going after, right? So I see lots of investors pitching to us, for example, that probably or others that probably should be at a family friends or early angel round. Before they even come to us, right? So it's yeah.
I've got a question on your philosophy around the time the early stage ventures spend on government grants. So recently there was an article posted, it had a little bit of a Vancouver angel community flavor to it, but I think it's worth sharing with this audience where, you know, there is so much early stage money from IRAP and angel investors love seeing their $50,000 or $100,000 turned into $200,000, $300,000. But at what cost? You know, the fortunate thing is that the funding's there to help the ventures. The unfortunate thing is that they're not as scrappy and competitive as ventures that are not in Canada that have that pool of unlimited, you know, research grants available. So what is your perspective on, you know, the angels' role in encouraging the venture to try to leverage all those? Is that a good use of time, or is it better to focus on the customer? I'm more on the latter, but I'd love to get your perspective.
You know, I think as a startup company, you need to focus. I mean, I've seen companies, they're professional grant writing companies. They just apply for one grant after another and get all this and actually don't seem to go anywhere other than getting another grant. So I think it's really focusing on the customer, and as you say, and getting equity. And then if you have the time and can put into time to go for a grant, it's just extra leverage. But I don't think you should rely on it or expect it at all. It's so, yeah.
Marty?
Yeah, I'll say it maybe a little differently, which is, first off, it depends on the type of company. You know, there are certainly certain companies that are very well suited to grants. And given the two that I mentioned that we're focused on, carbon capture and hydrogen, I mean, right now, if you're not hustling for grants, if you're in that space, you're, you know, literally leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
And so what I would say is treat it like you would a sales channel and dedicate a resource to it. Again, if you're in the type of company for which grants are generally available. And if you can dedicate a resource and that resource pulls in $2, $3, $4, $5 million a year, it's a simple ROI calculation. And we've got companies, and I could, I can mention two off the top of my head that I've been very involved with going back a decade. Inventus, they hired a head of BD, and that title really was like, hey, go get government grants. And he's brought in more than 20 million in grants. We've got a company right now, Econa, same thing. We've got a tech dev team and a guy, Gary, who's also technical, but Gary is unbelievable at knowing how to write grants. And so they've secured 12 million in funding, non-dilutive funding. And this is for a company that to date has only raised 2.5 million in equity financing. Yeah. And I mean, so just massive leverage.
Yeah.
Half of our companies probably haven't raised even $1 million because they aren't sort of in that sweet spot, in which case, I think, Darren, your point, like focus on the customer is what you got to do. So
yeah, I mean, I think Marty makes a point. There are companies in the especially in clean tech space where it's a real big capex spend they need, and STTC and I mean ERA, they can provide $5-10 million, right? And I mean that goes a long way. So,
but customers are always required, at least for those two deals, right? So,
yeah, you need to have partners in place anyway, with STTC and that. So, one of the companies I know has a partnership with Ballard that's applying for STC, right? So,
yeah. How early stage are you going in terms of the technology readiness level? And if some folks on the line are not familiar with the TRL or technology readiness levels, definitely get yourself familiar. It's used as an indicator for various investment opportunities and grant opportunities and lots of other discussions that the venture will ultimately have with different stakeholders. Marty, how early are you guys going?
Well, we've done this twice already, and we're about to do it a third time, which is we're willing to launch our own companies.
Yeah.
Where we haven't seen the right solution in the market, so decided to build the company ourselves. In one case, we spun it out of UBC, so went and found a professor and started it kind of TRL level, I guess it was 2. The other actually was the example I just gave was Econa. We saw a need in the market, and that there wasn't even a technology. It was we're going to go solve this problem. Let's build the team, and then we'll go find the tech. And we're about to do that a third time. I just hired an EIR, and that EIR's job is to pull together the tech to launch a new business. But if we're not doing it ourselves, we probably prefer you to be around, kind of 4 or 5, which is, show me at least on a desktop that it can work.
Yeah. That's really interesting, Marty. I'm not going to get into too much about Foresight, but we're actually exploring that as well. We still see a lot of ventures that are a technology looking for a problem, and we need to change that mindset. It's actually the amount of efficiency and resources wasted on ventures like that. It's just reality. I mean, unfortunately, we do want to welcome everyone into the Foresight community and walk them through the fundamentals of team, value prop, business model, customer discovery, but sometimes there's just never going to be that product market fit. And so we're exploring, if you understand the gaps, how can you, bring these entrepreneurs, like there's lots of people in the community you can really curate together to come up with something cool. So
yeah. Jeanette, like almost every company has some sort of technology, and then they'll pivot once, which is a euphemism for we didn't really know what the customer wanted. And then they'll pivot again because maybe now they've kind of got it right. And so why go through that process? Why not, just go start with what's the problem? If you really define the problem, then it's fairly straightforward to then go find a solution. So anyways, that's our approach. And we've found success doing that.
I think for us, it depends how transformational the technology is. Our earliest stage investment was Novobyne in Vancouver. And it was a very transformational technology. I mean, but they're not in trials yet. But it was recognized by lots and lots of very big companies who were all chasing it because of how transformational that technology was. And so we invested in it where it felt comfortable. They had some partners to set up. They still needed to do trials, but it may be 3 years before they start making sales. It's tougher for me to get something higher risk through my investment committee. That's got still a lot of risk to it. I like things that are tier 8 or that are at the pilot scale, pilot scale, where you sort of got more confidence in it.
Yeah.
Would
you describe Natural Products Solutions as bio, or you do a lot of food stuff as well, right? So agri-food.
Yeah, anything biological. So from ingredients to food, functional food, or we've done one CPG brand company, which is a non-alcoholic beer company in Calgary, which was a Series A round. I mean, typically when we get into that side of things, we want to see sales and revenue growth with the CPG brand play. But anything biological, so not all our investments are clean tech, but we do a lot in ag and food and stuff too. So
Yeah, perfect. What maybe you'd love to get sort of your thoughts on some trends. I mean, Marty, you've highlighted EVs. You know, your thesis is more around, I guess, the resource sector broadly, what we could call it. And so, what are you seeing in terms of trends there?
I mean, go back to sort of what I said around ESG, or you could call it the Larry Fink impact. You know, Larry Fink, for those who don't know, is the head of BlackRock, who manages 7 trillion, which I think is 5% of the world's money, who is flat out stated, if your company doesn't have a plan around climate change, then you're not going to be viable or backable. And so that's very much on trend for us. And so you can see it in both sort of what's come out of sort of Minister Wilkinson's office of late, and or Minister, what I guess now is Mr. Champagne's office from on the Canadian side of what they're interested in, which is policies around hydrogen, policies on climate change, carbon, CCUS, carbon capture utilization, all of which are going to have pretty massive government dollars supporting them. This is, again, that nice leverage you get.
Like a $3 billion strategic innovation fund, right?
Yeah, exactly. 3 billion for SIF. And so that's all at play. In parallel, I mean, one of the things I'll mention is, and this goes back to my other one, which is if you don't have a strong AI component to what you're doing, and I don't mean just sprinkle AI on it and it's a magical elixir, but we are seeing a fundamental transformation of the way, certainly in our space, natural resources is going to be operated. The days of hiring more labor in remote, dangerous camps, that's going to go away. As we bring on improved telecommunications, improved robotics, improved sensors, all of that is going to have a pretty massive transformation. And so we continue to invest pretty strongly on that thesis.
I think data more important. So for Foresight, we have about 300 active ventures in our portfolio right now, and more of them are focused on digital data transformation. There's still a hardware component, whether it's sensors and things like that, but there was a period of all the technology you can get, just throw it at the problem and see if it works. And now there's an element of, okay, let's take a step back and identify how big these problems really are, to know, and a venture itself can become quite successful just on that data component. Darren, do you see any of that? Oh, go ahead, Marty.
I mean, data is a competitive advantage. I mean, at the end of the day, Tesla is not worth more than all the other car companies combined because it makes the most reliable car in the world, because it doesn't.
Or pretty.
It's
the same shape since I think the beginning, right?
But what it has is arguably, and I think the only challenger on the horizon is Google. It has a bigger data moat than what anyone else can ever sort of amass. And when you think about the difference that makes, just ask yourself, what percentage of the market does Google have for search versus Bing? Like, I can almost guarantee no one on this call is using Bing as their search engine, because once you have more data than anyone else, your algorithms can improve faster than anyone else, and it becomes self-fulfilling. And that's why a lot of these industrial data plays, it's a land grab. And if you don't have that data advantage, you will ultimately lose to whoever does have it.
Darren, are you seeing a lot of data?
Yeah, I mean, we do see a lot of data. I mean, you're right. I mean, data has to be part of everything in that. From what we look at, we see a lot in, utilization of waste streams, for ingredients, etc. We have a company that's now taken the methane gas from oil and gas sites to make protein for animals. and so it's gas fermentation of protein, and it's in Alberta, based in Alberta, using the gas. And so it's really interesting how they're taking these byproduct streams to create different things in the animal feed and food market. Alternative protein is really big. There's a major problem with antibiotics. So everybody's looking for replacement of antibiotics. And biomaterials, and I'm just waiting for that to sort of take off in that.
Biomaterials has always been a soft spot for me. I love the concept of transforming something natural into something that replaces something that's perhaps been unnatural to date.
Yeah, I mean, I think bast fiber replacing plastic wipes with hemp is going to be massive. All the big companies are so into it, right? So it's, yeah.
Okay, back to some of the angel feedback. Obviously, the angels are coming in quite early in the venture's life cycle. How can they protect their stake? Can they? Is there a structure in place or a mechanism that allows them to sort of manage their ability to have a decent percentage early on? What should they expect? Darren?
I don't know how. I think it's more important to have some representation on the board, even though you may not have a board position. You do need somebody on the board that you can talk to, and you do need to get reports all the time and keep on up to date. And getting a huge percentage in company, I'm not sure how important that is. You need to have somebody you can trust, somebody that's going to talk to you all the time and not, okay, take your money and I'll talk to you another year, right? So it's, yeah.
Marty?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I would say, which is, first off, be realistic. So 40% of venture-backed companies, and these aren't angel-backed, these are venture-backed, which presumably has sort of gotten one stage further in the process. 40% go to zero. And this is across hundreds of thousands of companies over 50 years, and that hasn't really changed much. And go back to my opening salvo around, what really matters in this are big outcomes. And so if you don't try to optimize for, percentage at an early stage, do everything you can to optimize for success. Because one big outcome, if you own 1%, is much, much bigger than 6 mediocre outcomes where you own 10%. And so just focus on how do you help the company be successful and truly successful at kind of a global scale. The one other thing that I'll mention that I think everyone needs to ask, and I see this especially in Canada, are you competitive globally? Do you have a true global competitive advantage? Because if not, and I was just laughing my butt off. I see Joe had posted this article that Alex Danko had put in, and it was describing Toronto Waterloo as the nice person's Silicon Valley, which I think is hysterical on so many levels. What I will say, though, is if Silicon Valley is going to fund the same concept or same idea with 3 times more money and throw bodies at it who are working twice as hard, how do you win if you're competing against that? And so again, if you're an angel and you don't see that this company has a true global competitive advantage, ask yourself, does this make sense? Because if not, you're probably playing for a single and not a home run.
And I could add to that too, I think those companies are much more likely to get bought, and you're likely to see an exit where you can get a return on your investment. So how are you going to get your money back, right? If it's a small opportunity that nobody ever wants to buy or something, how are you going to make your return, right? So.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to do quick game here. I'd love to rapid fire on your thoughts, either a bull or a bear opportunity. I'll go through maybe 10 items, and then you can close off with your final thoughts on what some of the folks on here might want to take away. So Marty, bull or bear? Geothermal.
Bear.
Darren?
I would say bear too.
Even after that recent, wasn't there just a $40 million investment?
Ever. Yeah.
Got it. Hyperloop.
Oh, I'm a bull.
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, bull. Yeah.
Okay, this one, it's not even worth asking, but I will. Hydrogen. What part of hydrogen is the bull? All of it?
I'm real bull on that because I'm actually working with hydrogen companies on my free time. So I think it's an amazing place to be.
Yeah.
I'm a bull, but I want to reset expectations in this country, which is, it is not a panacea. We are gaga for hydrogen right now. It's good, but it's not that good. So.
Okay. Biofuels. Marty.
Bear. Strong bear, like grizzly bear.
Okay. Darren?
Yeah, I think it's a bear. It's eventually going to be replaced, but it's transitional.
Marty,
Yeah.
is that in every market, or are there certain markets where biofuels will make sense?
Everywhere.
Nope. Okay, great.
You know, it's interesting because you're seeing a lot of renewable diesel refineries being built right now. There's a lot of money going right now into biofuels at this time.
Yeah, so Darren, I want to be clear, and Jeanette will be clear also, which is there will be a lot of money poured after it. No angel will ever make money. I don't want to say universally, but those are big ticket projects done by EPCs on the behest of the Suncors of the world. It is not a place where folks like us should be playing.
That's true.
And I might add, I've yet to see any biofuels plant hit 2,500 barrels a day, competing in a market of 105 million barrels a day. It's a literal drop in the bucket.
Okay. New battery formations.
I'm a bear.
I don't know. I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
On that
I'm
one.
thinking Nano One. Would you consider Amanda's business on the lithium part of that process too, Marty?
No, so all right. So components going into, or sorry, materials going into batteries, I'm bearish. Coming up with new chemistries. Sorry, I'm bullish
that improve
on components. Sorry, bullish on components, bearish on new chemistries. It takes something like $10 billion to bring a new chemistry to market, which is just really, really hard for folks like us to play in.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Darren, did you answer that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the materials going to batteries is a big, we need to find ways to charge our cars faster and way less. So
okay, 1 minute left. Darren, 20-second snapshot on what you hope everyone can take away today.
I think I think it's fun to be an angel investor and feel free to, you know, take some risks here. That's how you're going to make a return, is take some risk and really feel that you believe in something that you're going to invest in that's going to be big and that. So
Marty?
I would just encourage everyone to take as broad of a lens as they possibly can. And so opportunities like this or programs like this that Jason's running, I think are fantastic. Talk to leaders in the sector in North America and Europe. A lot of what we're investing in, of course, these days is competing globally. And too often I find folks sort of take a very parochial lens. And so, that, you know, sort of the broader you can look at opportunities, the better.
Awesome. And my only takeaway is, you know, in this call alone, there's a community of folks that are, all of you are interested in learning more about angel investing, or you have already. You can also learn a lot from each other. So carrying on the dialogue outside of what's been brought together today can help too. Thank you so much, gentlemen. It's been fantastic. Jason, do you want to close off with any comments?
Sure. The most important thing is we beat Juan and Ha. There was 55 people on the call today. So kudos to our all-star panel. Thank you for joining us. Thanks, Darren and Marty. Great insights. And I think someone said in the chat, they set up a great contrast with our panelists last week. So thank you again. And thank all of you for taking some time this morning to join us. We look forward to seeing you on March 11th. And for our investors and CEOs, for the many touch points along the way until we get to our final deal on the 11th. Thank you all. Thanks, Jeanette, for a wonderful job moderating, and great job all. We'll see you again soon.
Have a great day, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone.